Hey, good evening. Welcome to Rominger Radio here with Carl Rominger. Lots to talk to you about tonight. Talk line number, by the way, is 717-916-5189. Again, 717-916-5189. And we're going to talk about all kinds of things. I had a little thread take off on Facebook. I don't know, a friend of mine, Christian sort of fella, basically told me that dogs don't have souls, so it's pretty obvious they won't show up in heaven. And I was curious if that was true or not. I'm not really the go-to guy when it comes to all things religious, as some of you probably figured out. I don't claim to have all the answers, and I'm always curious to hear what other people think the answers might be. So if you have some, if you know whether dogs go to heaven or not, 717-916-5189. Of course, I'm more interested in why. Let me lay it out for a second, because as my friend explained to me, and as a little research I did shows that at least as of 2001, Christians were equally divided, about 43% saying their dogs would go to heaven and 40% saying that animals don't have souls and won't go to heaven. And there's lots of articles out there and things about it, but I'm curious to see where you stand on that. Again, the idea basically being that since men are made special, remember we were created in the image of God and we were given an immortal soul and free choice, and therefore we're different than everyone else out there in the animal world, and we know the difference between right and wrong. We can get rewarded by our good behavior, by living the right life and accepting Jesus as our personal Savior, some people would say. Of course, some people say good living's enough. We'll get you into heaven. 717-916-5189. I want to hear what you guys' reaction to that is. Also tonight, I want to talk about the IRS missing emails. What happened there? I mean, do we really believe that Lois Lerner's emails mysteriously deleted themselves? Or is there some other possible explanation, like, somebody deleted them because they might be incriminating or bad? Of course, in this day and age, people still tend to send incriminating emails only because we have to. What do I mean by that? Well, it's so hard to get on in life anymore without an email account or without exchanging text messages that I think you'd be hard-pressed to find anybody. Except, remember, Al-Qaeda was doing that pretty proficiently, using personal couriers and not doing anything electronic because, of course, they were aware of the depth of the U.S. spying operation and understood that any and all electronic communications can ultimately be spied upon, which has led some people to joke that perhaps the NSA should be contacted to retrieve Lois Lerner's missing emails, since they invariably would have kept copies of them. But, of course, if they were to do that, that would be like admitting that they do, in fact, keep copies of all of our emails. And they may not want to do that at this point. So we'll have to wait and see what happens there. But we'll talk more about that a little later. 717-916-5189. Of course, we also talk about President Obama. And I say poor President Obama, getting a raft of garbage about withdrawing from Iraq and now things falling apart there. But all he did was honor the agreement that was signed by President Bush. So if President Bush's agreement was good enough for President Bush, why wasn't it good enough for Obama? I don't think he's getting a fair shake on this one. I sometimes think, once again, that our politics have degenerated to the point where you're not allowed to acknowledge that the other person did something right, or at least that they didn't do something wrong. I mean, wouldn't it just be simple to say, wouldn't it just be very simple to say that President Obama did nothing different than President Bush had already signed off on? I really don't think that would be a big problem. But, hey, what do I know? Could be above my pay grade. No, but seriously, I'm just trying to suggest that perhaps what Obama did was just what Bush had stamped off on, and why not go that route? So, who knows? I can't quite figure it out. So if you guys have some theories about this, and I'm always curious because everybody has these. I mean, I had 200 people comment, like 100 and some separate individuals for over 200 some comments, whether dogs have souls or not. It seems to actually strike a chord. And I did a little research, and I found some Catholic writers who seem to say that, yes, your dog could end up in heaven, although your dog doesn't really have a soul. Your dog might just end up there to make you happy. And I find this interesting because we have another person on the same Facebook thread who's pointed out that their idea of heaven. Okay, so let me give you a setup, and this is the dilemma. If you go, and by the way, if you want to jump in on the action here, 717-916-5189. Again, you can get in on the action, get in on the action now. Long story short, the dilemma goes like this. You die, you go to heaven. Your son dies, and for whatever reason, he goes to hell. Are you going to sit in heaven for eternity and just sort of enjoy yourself every day, or would you have any concerns for your son's well-being, feel bad for their fate, some regret, at least? I mean, the bond between a parent and a child, I would assume that a parent would naturally grieve for their child rotting in hell for all eternity. And that raises an interesting question. If you're not going to miss your kid, or at least not be upset that your kid is in hell in heaven, which is what some of the posters have suggested, then you're probably not going to be upset that your dog or cat isn't there. So it's very interesting to me, how do you rectify this? Well, maybe that person's wrong entirely. But a lot of people keep pointing out, well, in heaven it's all going to be joy and peace and love, and there's not going to be any angst or sorrow or any of the burdens of being human. So the only way to resolve that would be, I guess you'd have to stop caring about your child, or at least have no pity for your child any longer, which again raises the question of why you would even care if your dog were to arrive in heaven. And I'm asking these questions because somebody else was saying, oh, you're being anti-religious and you're not being very... I'm like, no, I want to sort of explore and flesh out these topics because people espouse beliefs all the time. And, we like to make fun, of course, of everybody else in the world. And what do I mean? Oh, those crazy Muslims, they think they're going to have 70 virgins in heaven. And those crazy Mormons, they think that if they have a sealed marriage, they're going to be able to bring have multiple wives in heaven. And those crazy Buddhists believe this, or those, everybody else's belief is somehow open to scrutiny. And so my idea is just to scrutinize our own belief structure as a, quote, Christian nation, end quote, and see where we really stand with things and how much do we really agree on. Like the pets in heaven one's interesting because the visceral response I've gotten from most people is, yes, my pet will be in heaven. The polling from a little over a decade ago shows that at least 40% of the population versus about 43% of the population differed on it. The rest didn't have an opinion or didn't know or probably didn't understand the question. So where does that leave us? Where are we at? Has that changed in time? I think it has. When I grew up, when I was a little kid, best I could tell, people's pets were, pets. And while this has been a long time in the making, the family dog has now become a child in America. People have just heard about somebody the other day, spent $6,000 on a vet bill for a dog. That's a major portion of their income because it's a member of the family. They don't worry about price. They just worry about saving, Fido. It's not a cost-based analysis. It's sort of like a child now. And so as we've made our pets more and more members of our family as a society, we've decided that they too are, connected to us and that their immortal fate is going with us. Now, I'm also curious, what about the billions of chickens that Americans eat every year? Are we going to see all those chickens in heaven? I mean, do chickens, in fact, come along as well? If dogs are coming and cats are coming, what about chickens that we eat? I don't know. I don't know where we sit on that one. And why do I say it that way? Well, where do you draw the line? So I have a great article I found written in a Catholic magazine that sort of talks about this dilemma. Where do you draw the line? Do you go down to mollusks? In fact, somebody actually petitioned the Pope to declare that anything higher than a mollusk would, in fact, have a soul and should be treated as having a soul. And, of course, the guy points out in the article that it was an animal rights activist from Berkeley, California, who did that. And if chickens have souls and immortal life, what about factory farming and putting them up in cages like we do? Does that change the perspective? Does testing on animals and the rules of animal husbandry have to change if we, in fact, accept that they are, if not our equal, they are still immortals like us? In other words, is it a sin to eat chicken that's been raised in a modern factory farm if, in fact, that's a creature whose immortal presence is almost as special or as special as a human being's? I don't know. 717-916-5189. That's one thing I don't claim to have. I don't claim to have the answers. But I'm curious to hear what people think, because a lot of people do have the answers, or at least they pretend, I should say. Pretend, that's a Freudian slip. Pretend to have an answer. And I know some of you guys are going to get mad at me. How are you mocking us? I'm not mocking anybody. In fact, I pointed out in one of my posts that any belief is due a certain level of respect, because beliefs cannot be disproven, meaning that I can not simply say your belief is right or wrong. I have no ability to say that it's wrong. Conversely, if it's a belief, you have no way to prove that it's right. But when people take a belief and they say, I have a belief based on a book, or I have a belief based on a text or a scripture, something that's tangible that I can compare their belief to, then it's fair game to look at the two over, which led to an interesting internet post where somebody had posted a picture of shrimp wrapped in bacon and pointed out that if you're Christian, you really can't eat them because shrimp and bacon are both forbidden in Leviticus. And that brings into this interesting question of, well, okay, the Old Testament doesn't exactly apply anymore, and the New Testament applies now. So the old laws are out and the new laws are in. And of course, there's some interesting scriptures cited by various people about where Jesus gave the permission to eat whatever you want because, I don't know, the rules changed for some reason. And that's the way it's explained. But I thought that was kind of a funny picture. And the person who posted it was homosexual, and they were posting it to point out that people frequently would attack their posts about gay marriage by saying that the Bible forbids it. And they were simply pointing out that when you read the Bible, you would come to a slightly different conclusion if you literally follow all the prescriptions in the Bible about things you can't do, and that those of us who eat shrimp and do all those things would be wise to realize that we're actually violating Leviticus. So, of course, a lot of modern Christians explain that they don't have to follow the kosher dietary laws because Jesus gave a free pass to the following of them in a certain scripture passage. So I thought that was interesting and worth looking at. But again, I want to hear what you guys think. 717-916-5189. I mean, religious topics, I'm not a preacher, so I'm not going to try to convert anybody to anything, nor am I qualified to give exact opinions, but I would like to know what people think about these things to see where we stand on the spectrum. I have a feeling that a lot of people want to call but are a little shy, afraid to maybe get in the foray, get in over their heads. You're not in over your head here, trust me. I'm probably in over my head right now, but I figured, what the hell, I'll just wait out there and see what happens. We'll call it a full immersion baptism, okay? So get your butts on here, 717-916-5189, and let's try to indoctrinate each other and see where we go from there. I know I had actually two calls before the show started, actually, which kind of made me laugh. So we've had two callers who are a little premature. They have a term for that. It's called premature callers. But they, that showed the excitement level. So let's get you guys back on the air. By the way, tonight's tasty beer is from Spaten Brewery in Texas. We've got a Shiner Premium, and it's got a little picture of Texas on it. I mean, what could be more appropriate than drinking a beer from Texas when talking about religion? It is our probably, say, most conservative state? I don't know. Our most progressive conservative state? I really don't know where Texas stands on the spectrum, to be honest with you. They definitely push out some conservatives down there, but Bush, of course, was a moderate, we call establishment Republican, who's not very palatable to the base right now. So perhaps that would be the situation. Now, I'm getting comments on what we're talking about, but come on now, guys. Get in here and call in. I don't want private messages on Facebook, little tweets and those sorts of things. Pick up your phone, pick it up. Dial 717-916-5189. We'll get you on the air. And we'll talk about all these little religious conundrums. And I go back to that one. What about, what is heaven all about? What do you envision? I'm curious to hear what you think it is. I'm not going to make fun of you. But what do you think heaven is? What do you think it entails? who are you going to see there? Your dogs, your cats, your mice, your mollusks. Hi, mollusk. Haven't seen you since I ate you. Actually, 12 per plate times 300 plates. It's going to be a lot of mollusks looking for me. Actually, somebody posted on Facebook that there's going to be some angry deer running around heaven looking for me. I shot 5 last November, thereabouts. So I would imagine, there'll be quite a few angry deer running around heaven. But, of course, they won't be angry anymore, and they won't recognize me, and I won't recognize them. I think that's what I've gotten from some of the posters, but I don't know. Again, where exactly we sit on this spectrum. So want to invite you guys on. Again, 717-916-5189, and we'll get you live on the air, discuss your views. Our dog's going to heaven. Let me turn tax while we're waiting for you guys to warm up your caller buttons here. And by the way, I'm up against some stupid soccer team tonight. Now, actually, if I wasn't on the air and hadn't committed to being on the air tonight, I would have gone to the Market Cross pub probably and watched the United States go on to victory. I watched the Ghana game the other day. It was a great game. As soccer goes, you don't look for high-scoring magical events because that, my friend, you're not going to get. 717-916-5189. Caller, you're on the air.
Yep, so we're talking about the afterlife.
Sure.
Well, Carl, what do you think? What is the domain of the afterlife? I mean, who belongs in heaven?
Who belongs in heaven? Well, see, that seems to be the interesting question. Who belongs in heaven? So one of the guys on Facebook, who's a noted atheist, by the way, is pointing out, that he couldn't enjoy his time in heaven knowing that a close relative was burning in hell, and that would make it impossible for him to want to be there. Other people tend to believe that everybody's eligible for heaven, best I can tell, except perhaps some people might have to go to purgatory first and make some attrition, and then I guess Ted Bundy goes to hell and doesn't have the ability to ever make attrition, and that goes through the works thing. But on the other hand, if you follow the fundamental Christian beliefs, if I accept Jesus as my true Lord and personal Savior, it doesn't matter if I'm Adolf Hitler as long as I do that before I die, right? And say, this is, I've changed my heart and now I've come clean, and therefore you can be forgiven for genocide. So I don't know where the domain of heaven lies, who should be in or who should be out. I think. And so
I see in the historical record there's the event of the Christ. He comes, and there's documentation of things that he does, and there's a supposed resurrection. But is the resurrection just part of a marketing message?
And you mean from the standpoint of the religion?
Yes, I'm asking.
Well, I mean, here, listen.
I'm putting that question out there because that would indicate that Christ went to the light plane, which is what we're discussing here. If we're discussing a plane of light, he maybe visited the plane of light, came back, and was reincarnated. Is that salient at this time?
What is the life plane? Explain.
Well, the light plane, according to ancient theorists all over the world, is just where the soul resides when it is not incarnated on Earth or anywhere in the universe.
I see what you're saying. So you're saying this is the where a free soul it happens to be floating about, or floating might be the wrong word, but tends to exist when it's not bound to some other material body.
It is not exactly. The soul is not bound to a material body, but the soul can select a material body to enter and then incarnate and then do work in that terrestrial plane.
And when you say work, what do you mean by work?
Well, anything that has impact or consequence in the three-dimensional world that we live in on Earth.
Okay. So, who gets in heaven in your regime? Tell me.
Everybody goes to heaven.
And what about Hitler's soul? Where does his go? Back into the plane and then back into a new body to try to work off his bad karma?
No, there is no hell. Hell is a marketing strategy to try to keep the people focused on doing the right thing. Everybody goes to the light plane ultimately.
And is there any...
This is documented through near-death experiences.
Okay.
Through the Dr. Raymond Moody, who started that chain of documentation of people experiencing death. They all reported the same sequence of events.
And you're saying, in other words, when people die. Now, of course, a skeptic might say, well, we just all experience the same biological way of our brain shutting down, so we have similar issues. You know, we all shut down the same way, so we see the same things when our brains are without oxygen. Is that a possibility, or am I missing the boat there?
I think it's a real possibility. I mean, if the universe is absent of any kind of spiritual or other world layer, then we are facing like a very grim, terrifying, cold future. So religion, I think, helps to heal those gaps.
Well, and there's certainly, and I always like to analogize from cheesy science fiction movies, right? But in the original version of RoboCop, a lot of the units they create kill themselves, right? And it's because they can't handle waking up in the body that they're in and the psychological stress of the situation. And so the reason that they go and get the particular, I think it's Murphy's his name, if I remember right, is because of his strong Catholic belief and his dutiful sense of duty, you know, strong religious, conservative, family-oriented police officer with the idea that he'll be able to handle the psychological rigors of waking up in this half-mechanical cyborg body. And to me, that strikes at the same idea that the concept of mysticism or religion is a evolutionary coping mechanism to allow a self-aware being to maintain a sense of purpose and not fall into despondency over the lack of a mortal, lack of ceasing to exist. I mean, that's one of the arguments that's been posited, is that a religious belief is
the alternative.
Right.
In the alternative, if you had to present it, if Racehorse Haynes came up here and said and made a case for the light plane, he would say explicitly that there is a place in the universe that exists in real time with the matter that we interact with every day, and that's where the souls are. But the souls consist of energy as opposed to matter.
Now, and of course, when we say energy, I mean, what does energy mean? Because in the classic physics, Newtonian, Einsteinian, E equals mc squared, energy and matter are completely interchangeable and one and the same. So are we talking about energy like normal energy, like radiation from the sun type energy or heat?
Right. That it's a transitive expression. So it goes both ways. You can accelerate matter to become energy.
Right. Which, by the way,
that's a different topic.
By the
about the expanding planet.
By the way, let me just bump in with a little reminder here. The call line number is 717-916-5189, and Brian says he'd call in, but the Heads in Heaven thing is simply absurd. Well, come on, Brian, then call in and explain to us why it's simply absurd. We'll have a little fun here. You can voice your opinion, get it out there. I want to hear it because I may actually take the other side just because I'm going to take the opposite side of every caller if I can, or at least play devil's advocate where possible. I know, Brian, you don't believe there is a devil, so I can start right there.
Good. Carl, thank you. And thank you for the show.
No, thank you.
And I want to let you open the line to the other callers, and I will be listening. Thank you, Carl.
Yeah, thank you, my friend. And feel free to call anytime because it's always interesting to hear what you have to say. 717-916-5189. I don't know who wants to be the next victim here, but certainly interesting call. And that's, of course, the scope of human belief. A lot of people believe in horoscopes. A lot of people believe in getting their tarot cards read. A lot of people believe that doing either is a sin. And the Christian notion of sin is probably very weak compared to the Sharia Taliban version of what's sinful. Although I recall as a child being told, that girls shouldn't wear pants. That was sinful, and cards were sinful. Of course, that would have been good advice to follow. What else? Alcohol. Jesus did not turn. They used to have to say that wine was kind of like a mistranslation. He just actually turned the water into grape juice because, when you're a member of a church that doesn't believe alcohol is moral, they have to then, of course, say that the word wine in the Bible doesn't really mean wine. It really means grape juice or juice, or not Jews, but juice. So, I always think that's an interesting little quirk. Let's talk about that one for a minute. What about churches who believe that Jesus did not turn water into wine? I mean, is that a valid belief? Can you just edit that word out? I know when we're talking about translations of the Bible, though, there's lots of historical arguments over various translations. What's the gist? And anybody who's ever translated between languages knows there's literal translation, there's the translation of what the author's trying to get across. And because two people can read the same poem, and we talked about this actually on the air the other day, that is the value of a poem or the literary jumping off point to evaluate a poem, whether the author got across what they intended or just simply based on what does it mean to the recipients as opposed to what the author intended. Well, same thing with translations. When you're trying to translate somebody else's work and their ideas as carried and conveyed in those words, you may make certain mistranslations, assumptions, misunderstandings that are as varied as the people who would read a book and come to slightly different conclusions about the characters or the gist of something or the purpose of something or the ideal being put across in a various phrase. They say that when you translate, for instance, from Russian, and of course I'm a big Dostoevsky fan, that Russian language lends itself to creating not just sort of like double entendres, but 3 and 4 layers deep. So you could string a series of words together, and you could really translate it as 4 different sentences. But each of the 4 sentences is actually relevant to the story, and that the literal translation of Russian into English is almost impossible in a lot of the literature because of the kind of layering that is routinely done by authors. Now, we have it here, too, where a turn of phrase may have 2 meanings, and they both could mean something to the story. Or one is an actual literal description in the story, but the other is sort of like a wink or a nod to the reader about one of the other ethos floating through the story. So anyhow, when you start going from ancient languages and translating these ancient texts and works, and you go through the system and their levels of recording and the way things were done historically, perhaps there's portions of the Bible that were mistranslated. It's possible. Or when I say mistranslated, I don't mean that, literally, okay, they got this wrong. It's just a version of interpretation. Now, one explanation that I've been told that solves that problem is divine inspiration. Brian, come on, get in here. 717-916-5189. Come on, you can do it. Pick up your phone. Call in. When Carl, the other Carl, finds out you wouldn't call, I'm gonna bust you out to him. Yeah. Avery, Avery's got some suggestions for callers too. The best way to listen to this show, by the way, is to go to my Facebook page, carlrominger.com, and just follow the comments as they go, because it sort of adds an overlay. It's like a live chat. I think I should come up with sort of a live chat. I should come up with a live chat window that goes with the show, on carlrominger.com, where we can field up a live chat and you can log in and say all your snarky things there. Although on Facebook, I think it's almost just as much fun. I'm also really curious a lot of times to see what people say after the fact, because these threads do last for a while. Now, the other night, though, and it's very interesting. I want to take a moment, and I'm going to read you a couple of these because I think it's worth. Is it really worth the effort? Yes, it is worth the effort. To look and see what people had actually said in reply, because for some people, this is such an obvious question. In other words, yeah, Brian, that's right. You're listening in now. Well, we want you to call. We don't want you to listen. We want to get you on here, and we want to get your very deep opinion as to what's really going on in the afterlife, which, as I understand, you don't believe any exists. And that is a very valid point of view. I would think just as valid as the faithful point of view, saying that what happens is obvious. I just always like the certitudes that people have of their beliefs. I don't have any certainty to my beliefs when it comes to this area because, unfortunately, as a scientist at heart, I'm always looking for some empirical proof, something to tell me, where we really stand in this world. And you may say, well, what do you mean by that? I say, well, something tells me, nobody's ever come back. Houdini and his wife had a little deal going on, by the way. Their deal was, when you die, he told his wife, when I die, here's a code word. And when somebody, when the time comes, I will try to pass through a medium to you this code word. So she would go around and talk to these mediums and try to get this sign from the other side. And, of course, it never happened. Now, let's see. Of course, when I said, my Christian friend just told me you won't see your dog in heaven as heaven as only people have souls, and I posited, is this true? In one of the comments, I had a guinea pig who's in heaven, so I'd imagine a dog would qualify. Yes, it is. Yes, but if you're not Christian, you won't be in heaven to see the dog. It's all in what you believe. All dogs go to heaven, which, of course, leads to this, by the way. There was a fictional exchange, and I say fictional exchange because it's actually referenced in one of the Catholic articles about the subject, about a Catholic church who put up a sign that said, all dogs go to heaven, and the neighboring Protestant church said, dogs don't go to heaven, read your Bible. And then there's a whole back and forth exchange. Well, I posted the Snopes article on it because you go to Snopes. Whenever you hear one of these crazy stories, you go to Snopes to find out if it's true or not. Well, anyhow, it turns out that those were most likely made with the church sign generator, which is a website application. You may have used it, may not have, where you can go to a website, pull up a church sign that they have some preset ones with different churchy backgrounds, and then you can put funny stuff on the church sign. Like your buddy's name, repent Mike Smith, you're going to hell. And it looks like that was an actual church sign along the road somewhere that you can, lay on your coworker's desk just to figure out how angry the human resource department is going to get when you're using quasi-religious messages to harass your coworkers. All right, we have another caller here. Caller, you're on the air. Name and location.
Brian, Newville.
How are you, my friend?
Pretty good.
I knew I could goad you to coming on. Well, listen, I know you have some strong feelings in this area, right? I know when I say strong feelings, maybe it's a strong lack of feeling. I don't know. 717-916-5189 is the talk line number for anybody listening. But okay, Brian. So is my dog going to heaven with me? Let's start there.
No. Of course, you're not going to heaven either.
Well, okay, let me rephrase the question. Are the nice people of the world, not me, let's just go with the well-behaved nice people of the world. Are any of them going to heaven?
Okay. No, I to clarify, I don't believe in heaven. I don't believe in hell.
Okay. Now, we had a caller a little bit ago who was talking about the light plane and higher states of being for the soul. Any belief structure there?
No, I believe that, just like you don't know where you were before you were born, you live for a finite period of time on this planet, and then at some point you stop living. And so just as before you were born there was nothing for you, after you were dead there is nothing for you as well. And so for me, my life here and now is what's most important to me.
Interesting. Well, what about what about people who remember past lives? Any explanation for that?
Well, yeah. Look, I don't want to come off too harsh. It is maybe a little harsh, but the people who believe in past lives are lying to someone. They're either lying to themselves or they're lying to other people. There is, and when I say they're lying to themselves, I don't see that as an intentional thing. I see it as wishful thinking, or I used to actually believe in kind of, well, I was a strong Christian believer when I was young, that I believed in some of the more pagan, New Age stuff. And so I came across a lot of people who did believe in past lives, and in those circumstances, nearly every single time, no one ever, well, very rarely does someone say, in my past life, I was a corn thrasher in the middle of, or wheat thresher in the middle of Scotland somewhere, and nothing ever exciting happened to me. It's always, well, I was Cleopatra, or I was the King of England, or I was, so. People tend to convince themselves of their own fantasies sometimes, and that comes out in those stories that you hear.
Yeah, and it is funny that you mention it that way. A buddy and I, we're going to go shooting this afternoon, so while we were waiting for his son to show up, we were watching one of these shows on aliens on Netflix, and of course people are talking about the Greys and but interestingly, there was nobody was ever abducted by an alien that looked like a Grey until after they came out with Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind or Third Kind or whatever the hell it was.
Third Kind, yeah.
Third Kind, and then all of a sudden, people around the world were seeing aliens look mysteriously like the ones Spielberg drew.
Exactly.
But it is interesting when you say that. Like, yeah, nobody goes. Let me tell you about I have actually been a file clerk for 1,000 years.
Right. Okay.
I started stacking tablets with cuneiform in ancient Samaria, and now I am, I'm just typing stuff into a computer here in Harrisburg. But somewhere in between, we got the papyrus, and then, most recently in the 50s when I died, I was using a typewriter. I understand what you're trying to say. People tend, if in fact they had a past life, it was very romantic and it was very swashbuckling, or, so now here. But let me play devil's advocate with you for a second. You'd have to agree that there's no proof that you're right.
Well, yes, but I'll let you continue down your train here.
I mean, there's no proof that you're right. There's no proof that anybody else is right, best I can tell either, but there's no proof that you're right.
Right, but there's a difference between basing your thoughts, beliefs, actions on something you can absolutely prove and something that you have a pretty good idea is true. I have a pretty good idea there's no such thing as heaven. I have a pretty good idea there's no such thing as God. I have a pretty good idea there's no such thing as hell. And the reason I have a pretty good idea is that the nature of the universe has certain properties, and certain properties allow for certain things, and God is not one of those things. So I'd have to say that in absence of some direct evidence to say that God exists, and I would argue that there isn't that evidence, just like I would say, the Bertrand's celestial teapot. If I tell you that there is a teapot in orbit around the planet, and you say, well, no, there isn't, then, well, sure, I could say to you, well, you can't prove there isn't unless you go out into orbit and check every possible orbit of the planet for a teapot hanging out somewhere. But you can equally say, well, if there were a teapot there, we'd have to explain how it got there, and we'd have to show, well, it went up on this shuttle, and so on and so forth, to convince people that, well, yes, in fact, there is a teapot in orbit around the Earth. You have to have that basic evidence for the positive claim. When you say, well, you can't disprove me, you're putting the weight of evidence onto the wrong person. The way of providing evidence is on the person making the positive claim.
Well, and it's interesting, when you talk about how a religion gets generally accepted. So I once had a psychiatrist on the witness stand in a death penalty trial. And my client was insisting that the victim was not dead, that in fact she was still alive, and you can't be killed and nobody can be killed. And despite the fact that he had shot her 11 times or whatever it was, she wasn't really dead, so why is he going to have to go to jail? And he was declared incompetent for a couple of years before he eventually stood trial. But at some point when we were having one of the hearings, the psychiatrist is up there and he says, this is the situation, and he's delusional because he actually believes that she's still alive, and that's not possible. And of course, I just sort of say, well, let me ask you a question. Let me just change the. Assume that my client says, well, she did die, but then she was resurrected a few days later, and then I saw her, so she must be alive. And he goes, well, I know where you're going with this. And of course, the DA is like, objection relevance. The judge is like, no, I'm just curious to hear the answer to this. And the psychiatrist said, when enough people believe something, then it's no longer considered delusional. And so I was like, so what you're saying is if enough people agree to the same myth or the same ethos or the same whatever, then it's no longer a delusion. But if only one person does, then it's a delusion. He says basically, that's not exactly technically correct, but yeah, basically at some point when a magical or mystical belief becomes sufficiently widespread, it's no longer a delusional belief.
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, I wouldn't say that a belief in God is necessarily delusional because there are reasons for people to wish to believe in God. However, I would also say that when you base your beliefs on a simple declaration without looking for the evidence of such a belief, that you are committing an unreasonable act. Whether you consider that delusional or not may be up for argument, but it's still an unreasonable argument. It's not one that can be reasoned. So in that case, you would need to, if you wanted to claim that it were a reasonable argument, you would need to offer evidence for that positive belief.
Okay. So let me ask this question now. Assuming that because of the very nature of God, right, he's intangible, there is no positive evidence that you can offer. Hold on, my friend. By the way, we're going to add some people to the group here. So hold
Sure.
on. Let's see. I think they're going to try to convert you, so we shall see. Now, let's see. Second, I think I can only get 2 people on the group here at a time. It's not letting me. It's not letting me pick up the other call. Okay, new caller. You're on with Carl and Brian. What's going on, new caller?
Not too much. How are you, Carl?
Good.
Good. I'd like your legal opinion on the matter. That's all right.
Well, we really don't answer legal questions on this show, but if you ask me a general question, I may be able to.
Okay, yeah. If I go to...
Well, repeat that?
Hello? Hello?
Hey.
Hello?
I think I lost my other caller.
Can you hear me?
I can hear. I should have everybody on the air here.
Hello? Carl?
Yes.
Okay, there you are. Is the other guy there?
They were. I don't know where they went.
Oh, my God. I didn't mean to take over.
That's right. Hold on. Call me right back. All right. We lost these other guys. What's going on here? Easy. All right. So you had a legal question. I think I dumped all 3 of them. I can't tell for sure. All right, caller, you're on the air.
This is Brian back. I got dropped at some point.
Yeah, I don't know. You know what? I had so many calls coming in at the same time, I think Skype just dumped everybody. Apparently, everybody wants to convert you, Brian.
Well, that's fine with me. They can try.
But, and going back to my thing, assume by the exact nature of it that there is no way to get proof-positive evidence, that the only way God reveals himself is in these conversations he has with these prophets, of which, by the way, depending on which sect of the Christian religion you're in, there haven't been too many prophets recently. Or if you're in certain other sects, then, Joseph Smith, for instance, and in another popular religious sect, right after Jesus came Muhammad, who kind of straightened everything out once and for all.
Supposedly, yes. For me to answer that, I would say that people have a tendency to latch on to certain beliefs, especially if they're fantastical or if they're, they strike the imagination or if they speak to something personal to them. But, an argument from personal, if you say, well, I believe it, therefore it's true, and you accept that as the weight of the evidence for the argument, you can accept all sorts of beliefs, including your delusional client that you talked about earlier. So that's why when we're talking about rational beliefs or reasonable beliefs, we're talking about, okay, this is a belief that I can hold because it's been demonstrated in some way, shape, or form.
Well, which is an interesting question, which is if beliefs are, if a person's beliefs are unquestionable, then why can't my client's belief carry the day? Why can't he be acquitted on that?
Exactly.
And the answer is because we tend to judge his beliefs as wrong. So maybe
no, I would disagree with that. I would flatly disagree with that. We don't judge his beliefs as wrong. Well, and maybe a little bit, but I would say we don't believe him because there's no way that he can demonstrate, for example, that the person that he killed rose after 3 days and was walking around and that he could see them. And in fact, you could demonstrate that belief can't be true, or at least to a reasonable extent, by demonstrating that that person is still in the grave that they were put into, or on the shelf in the morgue or wherever they happen to be. So in that perspective, now of course you can move into the absurd about, well, that person then died later or something like that. But at some point you have to take a look at the preponderance of history and say, okay, in no circumstance can we ever demonstrate that at any point in time anyone has ever risen from the dead.
Right. That we know of.
Right.
That we know of.
But an extraordinary claim, it's been said an extraordinary claim requires extraordinary evidence. So if you're making a claim like someone rose from the dead, you wouldn't just accept that claim about anybody else on the planet. So why would you accept it for Jesus without evidence? And
I guess another interesting question, I say interesting question, but and the biblical scholars out there who are listening can help me out with this. Are there events which were witnessed. I guess this parting of the Red Sea would come to mind. Okay, if it looked like the Charlton Heston version, but most of the time throughout, and not just the Christian Bible, but many religious texts, God's always like revealing Himself and on top of some mountain to some guy, or in a room to some girl, or But it's never like there were 100,000 people gathered in a soccer stadium in Brazil, and God just decided to throw down a miracle just in case the modern human population was doubting His existence.
Right. Well, and I've said it to many believers. I'm involved with Pennsylvania non-believers. I'm the president of that organization. It's Central Pennsylvania's largest group of atheists, agnostics, and humanists. And I do a lot of going out in public and talking to people about this. And when I say that, I say, look, God knows if He exists what it would take to convince me of His existence. Therefore, if I am not convinced, I'm going to lay that on God's hands to figure that one out. But in the meantime, without that evidence to support a belief, I can't possibly believe in it.
Right. So okay. So let's go with the all present, all knowing, all powerful God. In other words, He would know exactly how little or how much it would take to convert you.
Right.
And what you're saying is that therefore God should be perfect position to cause everybody to feel the Holy Ghost come to them. In other words, to acknowledge His existence. I mean, I got to back up because I haven't figured this one out exactly, but it's been explained that the ghost comes upon you. So people say, well, at one point suddenly the Holy Ghost was upon me, and I recognize these things. And I'm always wondering, is that you opening your heart, or are you saying that the Holy Ghost opened your heart? And so from a religious context, what you're saying, though, is if God has the ability, if in fact God does open hearts, then He knows exactly what it takes to open anybody's heart with precision.
Right.
And therefore, why wouldn't He open every heart with precision?
Correct.
But that breaks down the concept of man having free will, doesn't it?
Well, yes, it does. And there are many different Christian scholars and some not so scholarly people and others who have considered the question of free will versus not free will. But here's the thing, I'm not sure. In fact, I'm pretty certain that the basic concept of free will doesn't exist. But that's probably going to get the conversation really off topic. But as far as Christianity is concerned and the Christian idea of free will, I would say that if they're going to claim that free will exists and they're going to claim that God is all-knowing and all-powerful, that they have to come up with some kind of reconciliation for that. Now, the Calvinists, for example, have resolved that by saying free will doesn't exist and everything goes according to God's plan.
Well, and so let's stop for a second, because I always like the story of the Calvinist, right? Because since there is no free will and everything's according to God's plan, you can only live out God's plan and discover whether you're going to heaven or hell. And they say that Calvinism is a particularly psychologically distressful religion for the believer, because every time you do something bad or wrong, it's a further evidence that you're probably headed in the hell direction.
Right.
Because you have no ability to atone.
Right.
The Calvinists.
And at that point, with the Calvinists, I'd have to question if they say that God is all good and all powerful. I would have to question that assertion, unless you, as some of them do, define good as whatever God does, but then you have to explain how they can claim that morality comes from God if God Himself is not moral. There's a bit of a loop there that I'm not sure that they can reasonably resolve. But
and by the way, Brian, I don't want to interrupt you for 1 second, but if any other callers want to jump on with Brian, 717-916-5118. Now, we probably won't get the same problems we had before. I think Skype just crapped out because I think 5 people tried to call in at exactly the same time. 717-916-5189 if you guys want to jump on the air with him. So don't be shy about that. But go ahead, Brian. I'm sorry.
That's all right. And so what I was saying is that if you do believe in free will and you do believe that God is all-knowing and you do believe He's all-powerful, you do believe He's all-present, and you do, if you can believe all of that stuff, and then say, well, why wouldn't God, or that God doesn't want the best He can have for humanity, and then you point to some human beings who can believe in him and some human beings who can't believe in him, then you have to explain that. You can't just say, well, it's all on humanity, when supposedly 2,000 plus years ago there were all these miracles to convince the human beings of those times that God exists, and now we're today, 2,000 years later plus, and we're not seeing the miracles. In fact, we're explaining the phenomena we used to not be able to explain in the context of understanding the universe better with the vehicle of science.
Yeah, well, yeah. Listen, there's a certain theory of religion. Let me say, is so. For instance, why were early societies so interested in being able to predict the motion of the stars and the moon and the sun and the position of the earth with great accuracy? And one of the explanations is that if you were a priest and you knew when the solar eclipse was going to happen, and you could tell everybody there's going to be a solar eclipse and just say, but basically, let's rephrase, God's going to swallow the sun tomorrow, but if we pray long enough and hard enough, he'll unswallow it. So, and then what happens is then after you correctly predict this and cause this to happen, you then turn around and you have amazing political currency with the populace.
Well, I don't think many of the early priests actually predicted the eclipse, but what they did was they said things like, well, the eclipse happened, what do we do? And the priest is saying, well, this was God's sign, but it will come back, knowing that eclipses are temporary. The sun will come back because if you pray hard enough, and then when it does, it reinforces the belief.
Well, yeah, I don't think early enough they could predict it. I think that later, even thousands of years ago, these priests and even Stonehenge and all these guys, they figured out how to predict all this stuff, because being able to predict it adds the next level of power, because the non-believer goes, no, wait a minute. Every time there's an eclipse, you tell me something, but you don't seem to know when they're coming. And then the guy goes, no, wait, I'm in such close contact with the powers that be that I can tell you that God told me he's angry and he's going to prove it tomorrow, and here's how. Right.
Well, and there's some of that does come into play with predicting the seasons and the harvest and all of those things being but I think not until the advent of science were there more detailed and more a deeper understanding of the phenomena at play. And I think that there were definitely many preachers that were capitalizing on the ignorance of the populace with studying, well, how does this work from a timing aspect and predicting some of that stuff. But by the same token, I think they also, belief is a powerful thing, and some of the believer commenters on the thread I was following are saying that belief and faith are powerful things, and they absolutely are, but it doesn't make them true.
And there's actually, there's also another penchant amongst the priests, and I don't mean Christian priests, I mean priests throughout time immemorial, to have virgin births occurring in the temples.
Sure, yeah. Mithra, Hercules, there's so many examples of virgin birth and other miracles associated with Jesus' coming that Mithra is a really blatant one.
Hey, we got another caller on there. Who we got here?
This is Gigi, and I'm calling you from hell. How you doing today, Carl?
Good, man. You're on with Brian. I don't know if he believes. I don't think he believes in you, Gigi.
No, listen. And I don't believe in hell either. That's sort of why I'm making a mockery of it. Basically, I don't believe in heaven and hell. I believe that there's hope. I believe that the Bible was written, like I said, to control the population so that the people on earth didn't go wild. Imagine if all these people on earth, Carl, didn't think that you could kill, rob, steal, all this stuff, blah, 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 and you don't get into the pearly gates. Who the hell knows the gates is pearly to begin with? And, it's like if you didn't have some type of a control, there'd be chaos. We live in chaos.
Do you ever watch Pirates of the Caribbean, the movie?
Yeah. I have.
Well, okay. Let me just say, so at one point, the one guy says to Johnny Depp, it's the Black Pearl. She leaves no survivors. To which he says, then how does anybody know what the Black Pearl looks like if she leaves no survivors?
No survivors, exactly. And it's ridiculous. The church, the Catholic Church, is $170 billion is how much the Catholic Church has. That's as of 2010. Now, You have a $170 billion business.
They're losing some of that lately, but
Eight nine. 717-916-5189. We'll see what happens here. And we'll try to get you back here on the air, guys. Give it another holler here on Skype because I got to get this ring. Skype's back up, so go ahead and fire away, boys. 717-916-5189. All right, Gigi, I think you're back on the air, my friend.
Yeah, I'm back. Is the other guy back yet?
Not yet. No, don't worry about him. You just talk.
Okay, but it's a large business, and the Bible was written by man. Okay, and let's just use this for an example. Carl, you got into an accident. Let's use this as an example. Carl was driving down the road, and he got into an accident. Okay, you hit the rear end of someone's car, and I'm the first one to hear the story. All right, now I go to my buddy and I say, hey, Carl rear-ended some guy's car while he was texting.
Right.
Then the next guy says, hey, Carl, wrecked his car while he was texting and not paying attention. And it just grows and grows and grows. The Bible's been in too many hands. It's from the beginning of time. There's a New Testament and an Old Testament. Why do you think there's a new one? Because the old one's outdated for modern society. So you can't really live by it, so to speak. So they wanted to update the new one. I mean, there's too much going on. There's nothing but, you look at the news, you'll see churches ripping people off all the time, stealing their money, the pastors, taking money from the church, so on and so forth. Are these holy people?
Well,
they're doing even worse than that, but I don't even want to talk about that kind of stuff because it's disgusting. But you know what I'm saying.
So you would posit that the church is a mechanism of hope.
Hope, exactly, like Obama's campaign, hope. And that's why people voted for Obama. And I'm going to tell you the truth, and that's why, because of hope. People, without hope, you don't have nothing, Carl. If you don't hope that tomorrow that whoever you're interested in comes over and you get laid, you don't have nothing or whatever you want, whatever you need that you hope to have. If you don't hope for it, you don't have anything to keep you going. Stop hope for a week of everything. I guarantee you're depressed.
So let me ask you a question. What do you think happens when we die to us?
I think that we just disintegrate, just like anything else. We disintegrate. We're put into a box. We disintegrate, and we stay there until eventually they run out of space and they need more landfills, and maybe one day we'll be a part of a landfill.
Okay, but you don't think there's any portion of you that goes on after death?
I think your body has energy. I think there is an energy. I think it's possible that you may have a soul. I don't believe that it's not possible that you could have a soul and possibly live on to something else. But I don't think that our bodies or our souls go to heaven or a hell. I believe that if God intended there to be a heaven and a hell and that all this was true, we wouldn't have the problems that we have today in this world. Listen, if God sank the earth, he did. He flooded the earth, okay?
And Brian's back on here with us, by the way. Brian, if you want to chime in, feel free.
Oh, there he is. Now, Brian, if God intended for, God already destroyed the earth one time, okay? Supposedly with Noah and his ark. Okay, now this is what I'm just telling you based upon what I know and what I was taught, okay? There was already destruction of the earth, supposedly. And I want to know what the hell was going on so bad that he destroyed the earth that hasn't happened yet.
You mean what were they doing that was well maybe
what pissed them off? What really made them upset?
30 out of the 50 states had legalized gay marriage at that point, and then they had to have a flood.
I know, not at all. Yeah, there's been nuclear wars.
They legalized marijuana. They
you know what I mean? Like, there's lots of stuff going on. They legalized gay marriage.
So that's an interesting. It is a good, interesting question, though. I mean, what did man do that so angered God that He had to wash them all out? It was because they were sinful, and they were, doing all these bad things.
What sin didn't we? What sin didn't we invent yet?
And keep in mind with that story that you add in the fact that it's not just adults who had the capability to sin or not sin. Even Christians who say sometimes that you don't. There's an age of where you're allowed a grace period of being innocent or not up until a certain point. And that's simplifying. I'm just blanking on what they called it, but. In any case, remember, we're talking about infants, we're talking about animals, we're talking about anything associated with these people dying in a flood, supposedly. Now, luckily, there is no evidence whatsoever that any kind of worldwide flood existed. In fact, in order for that to happen, you would have to really, really change the law of physics beyond recognition. So there's no possible way the entire world could have been flooded.
I agree. Hey, that's possible. I'm always open to new things. Hey, that's something I might have just learned.
Well, maybe the valley that Noah lived in was flooded.
That's a more reasonable possibility. That's a more reasonable possibility. But then, if you're going to say that, you remember at the end of the story that God put on a rainbow to tell people that the world, He was never going to flood the world like that ever again. So, if it was just a local flood, then what you're saying is that God is a liar.
Or wait, let me ask it this way.
Which I'll allow for that.
Why did God then feel the necessity of putting up a rainbow to say He would never flood the world again?
Right. So well, He said in the story that's what it was, but
that would be regret, wouldn't it? Or
maybe that meant somebody was going to legalize gay marriage.
So, I don't know what the right answer is, but I just always... So maybe the story was really more of an allegory. Maybe it wasn't meant to be taken literally.
Yeah, well, and that may be true, but it's not presented in the Bible that way.
Are you in trouble? So
I'm sorry. I'm on a radio show. my wife walked into the room. I'm going to move into another room here.
Eric, you're so cute.
Right. Just tell her you're on the phone with Jim from Allstate.
Tell her it's your mistress. See how that goes over. Amongst atheists, you can't have a mistress? Wow. I thought if you were an atheist, you could.
No, okay, so here's the thing, and I actually want to kind of answer to that because and not.
Yeah, no, and I'm setting you up for a little softball. Go ahead.
Yeah, but there is this common idea that atheists, because morality comes from religion, and without religion you don't have morality, and that's simply not true. And this answers some of what the other caller was saying about. And you were saying it too about the priests doing things in order to get people to act in a certain way, but I think they were wrong. I think for the most part, most people have the capacity for empathy, and I think that it is empathy that causes us to build the other social structures that we do when we talk about let's not kill, let's not steal, let's think about how other people might feel if that was done to them. And let's defend those things, those people who are affected by those things. So that I think, for the most part, barring sociopaths and certain other physical aberrations and certain experiences that cause people to be not able to empathize with other people, barring that, I think
everybody has the right to empathy. You're correct. However, I feel like an animal when you.
Well, I don't think everybody can.
I think everyone's born with the ability to. I think what happens to them over their lifetime may take that away.
Well, there's a whole nature versus nurture argument there. But there has been some evidence to show that in certain people who are sociopaths who have committed mass murder and other things, that the area of the brain that allows them to feel empathy is severely reduced. There's lower activity, less mass to that area of the brain. So it's not really an answered question as to whether it's nature or it's nurture.
Well,
at the end of the day, the people who have lost the ability to empathize, they don't get it back. There's no treatment for sociopathy.
A little auto tappination and the right use of a knitting needle, and you too can lose your apathy. or I'm sorry, yeah, or it could be gain apathy and lose your empathy. Right.
Yeah, there is a physical area of the brain that's responsible for processing the feelings of empathy. And if that area of the brain is damaged, sometimes people who get into car accidents or such where they take a blow to the head can actually lose that area and actually become sociopaths. So it really is. And I asked a Christian, I was out, we were tabling at Jubilee Day last week, and I asked a Christian about how does God account for that? If you're talking about sin, and then you talk about areas of the brain that directly affect behavior, and it has to do with how you were born or how your physicality is, how can that be a choice at that point? How can you send somebody to hell because they have brain damage?
Well, we've asked the same thing of the criminal justice system, too.
It's a very good question. I really wish they would have come up with a good answer for that.
Ooh, we got a deep breather on here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, this is nice.
Oh no. Yeah. So anyway, if you guys want to join in, by the way, it's 717-916-5189. At some point,
real quick, I just want to make a point, if you don't mind.
No, you cannot. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
But the Catholic Church and things back to this, whether there's a God and things, so on and so forth. I don't believe that the church cares about people. I think they really care about lining their pockets. If you go over near the Vatican, you'll see there's a lot of big, huge homeless rate over in that area as well. The church itself, for instance, does make donations. However, their donations towards healthcare networks, 28% to colleges, 6% to day-to-day operations in local dioceses, which is other churches, and 2.7 to national charities. You don't hear anything about the church giving anything to the homeless, giving to people who, need food, or, giving to Africa. How about Africans over there? We send them rice and water. You'd think the church with $170 billion would at least teach them to plant a garden.
Well,
okay.
Or stop telling people in Africa to not use condoms, which I think is.
Did I lose you?
Hello?
You're on the air.
Carl, it's your friend Chris from Facebook. How are you doing, buddy?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. I wanted to talk to the atheist.
I don't know where he went.
Was it Carl Silverman?
No, it's Brian.
Okay.
Brian, you still there? Yeah, we lost. Brian's going to have to call back in. All right, Chris, he'll call back in, I'm sure. What's going on, my friend?
Not much. I was driving home from work the other day, and I saw the police sitting in a Turkey Hill, and they had their lights off.
I just knocked Chris off the air, Brian, but he'll call back in.
Okay. I don't know if you heard what I said about the Catholic Church.
No, go ahead. Yeah, please repeat that.
Okay, what I was saying is that one of the most horrible things up until very recently is the Catholic Church was very much promoting that people not use condoms, even in AIDS-ridden Africa, where condoms are such a necessity. They were pointing out that their principles about against birth control were more important than preventing AIDS. And now, very recently, they said, well, it's still a crime to prevent, or it's still a crime against God to prevent birth or prevent impregnation, but you can try to, if you must have sex. And there is a risk of AIDS, and it's okay to wear. It's not as bad to wear a condom in that circumstance to prevent AIDS, but it's still a bad thing.
I'll bet that Irish guy from The Meaning of Life would love to have had that rule available to him before he had to sell all his children. So hold on, Brian. We got Chris back. Chris, what you wanted to tell us about something, and then you want to talk to Brian, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, since you guys, what was his last statement? I didn't hear what he just said about the condom.
We were just talking about that the Catholic Church has sort of said, okay, the lesser of two evils might be to use a condom if you're going to have sex. What do we need here? I actually think part of the problem is we'll have to quit Skype and then we'll restart it because that will probably seems to work. Well, we run the tech here as we go, so we have to live with what we get. So, Brian, Chris, call back in because we're now back up and live with Skype. So hopefully we'll be able to pick you up here pretty quickly. I've also got this great problem with Skype where for some reason it wants to run on my cell phone. At the same time, it wants to run on the laptop. And I don't think it really makes a big difference, but it does create some issues sometimes in getting the calls. Okay, here we go, boys. I'm going to get you back on the air here. All right.
Oh, keep cutting me off, man.
All right, you're back on, my friend. So is Brian.
Okay.
I'm on too. Skype doesn't like us.
Well,
okay.
It's just that we get a tax of calls all at once, and then, I don't know, just Skype putzes out, which, again, hey, we're not used to having this kind of call volume, so this is good. I think this touches a nerve with people. So go ahead, guys. Okay, so let's talk about the little rubber things.
Okay, so what I was going to say is for a lot of people, they may not understand the reason the Catholic Church is against birth control, right? It's twofold. One of the reasons is they believe that life begins at conception as soon as the sperm meets the egg, travels down the fallopian tubes, and then certain forms of birth control don't allow it to implant into the uterus. They make the uterine wall thicker, and they believe that's a murder because they believe life already started, right? Ironically, the Republican Party, in their platform, if you read it, in 2012, they had that life begins at conception, so if you vote Republican, you can't be for some forms of birth control and be in agreement with the party platform. The second reason the Catholic Church doesn't like condoms is because it allows people to fornicate, which they consider a sin. And for people that don't know what fornication is, it's sex outside of marriage.
Oh, you didn't have to tell me.
You have to tell Carl. Carl knows it. He figured that out at age 16.
I've heard of it. I even saw it in a movie.
He heard of it. He never did it. But and some people, like my cousin, would probably say, well, I live with my girlfriend. That's not fornication. It still is if you're not married. And they believe that the Catholic Church does that allows people to have sin without consequence of having a baby, right?
Right. I mean, It's a good way to cover up the sin, no pun intended.
And also, I would say, finally, they also believe that every time you have sex, you should give life the chance to be created, and condoms stop that.
Well, you're not supposed to cast your seed across the infertile ground, are you? Somewhere I heard that.
Yeah, that is correct, and I don't agree at all with the doctrine, obviously, but it is correct that the Catholic Church more or less believes that as much as possible, natural interaction when you have sex is the most important thing, and that birth is producing a child is one of the most important functions of sex.
Let me just take this show one step farther into the gutter then, because I don't know the answer to this, but maybe one of you two does. What is their view of anything besides, let's just say intercourse? So, per os or per anus. I mean, I assume that those would be unnatural acts since they couldn't lead to procreation.
I think, Carl, they would say that would be a sin as well, oral, anal sex, anything like that. And also,
they do believe it's a sin until they have the choir boy behind the
right. Yeah, and the Catholic Church lobbied they wouldn't agree to rolling back the statute of limitations on crimes in Pennsylvania, so they weren't serious about getting the people in their own congregation. And also, I would say the Catholic Church is also against artificial insemination or any kind of other methods that might help someone create life if they can't naturally. They're against that stuff.
So,
you know?
Yeah, so they don't believe in foreplay is what you're telling me.
Pretty much, yeah. Your sex life is going to get pretty boring if you're a real Catholic.
Yeah, I might take a trade-off on that, though, because then you can, you just sort of say, I'm sorry, dear, it's no foreplay. We just have to, be done. I got to go to bed.
Yeah, just cook dinner and that's it.
Yeah, go cook dinner and get back in here. That I need to get worked out. We can always take a look into that too. So any of you guys, little smarty computer guys, want to give us a ring and tell us what to make Skype work better? I don't know. 717-916-5189. I just saw a really funny comment from one of our sometimes callers who is suggesting no foreplay, cooked dinner equals proof man-made religion. I think you're right, actually. All right, guys. I don't know. Skype dumped you one more time, but you guys are persistent, so here you are.
I'm back.
Yeah, we were talking about foreplay. I knew you'd be back with all the sex talk. Actually, Lucinda just said no foreplay, cooking dinner equals proof man-made religion, which is another interesting aspect. I mean, people have sort of said, it's amazing that the Christian doctrine, the Muslim doctrine, coming from societies that made women second-class citizens, that the religions themselves make women second-class citizens, and that's just a reflection of the men who created the religion as opposed to God's divine will.
I would push back, Carl. I would say that the religions don't make women second-class citizens. It's the interpretation and the cherry-picking of verses by males that make women
I would strongly disagree with you on that. I think that, but I think it's important for you to understand that in that particular situation, you have religion making specific rules to control reproduction. And since women are the vehicle of reproduction, at least in the mind of, the religious, the preachers and so on and so forth, once you control reproduction, once you tell people when they can and can't have children, how they can have children, and put all those rules into play, women are the obvious choice at that point for more control so that reproduction can be controlled. And that's there's a very strong component in controlling people's lives when you control their reproduction. And
I would say... Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
And your name is Brian, right, Brian?
Yes.
First, Brian, I'd say that there's a verse, and I can't think of it off the top of my head, but I can research it and post it on Carl's wall. It says, as the man, you're supposed to love your wife more than you love yourself. And you never hear a lot of preachers talk about that, right?
Well, that's not quite what the verse says, but yes, okay.
Okay, well, I'll look it up and I'll find it. Okay. So, second of all, I'd say that I think there are a lot of denominations, especially in the States, that they do want to control people, and they do effectively do it. But true religion that I've experienced in my life hasn't controlled me. In fact, I still do whatever I want. So I would say that I think there is a set of rules, and I think the whole sex within marriage thing, obviously, a lot of people don't follow it. I think the idea of the rule is a good idea because I'm sure if you ask Carl and all the child support and custody battles he's done and all the problems that sex outside of marriage has caused, it isn't always a good thing for society. That doesn't mean everybody's perfect and they never looked at a porno video.
The verse you're looking for is Ephesians 5:25-28. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle, any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies, not more than. He who loves his wife loves himself.
Okay, fair enough. But still, I think that, I think the reason sometimes women get marginalized in society is because some people do have that view that men are better, whereas my view is that men and women are equal.
Which is good, but that's not historically. I mean, Paul talks about women should not lead the church. There's all, there's a whole thread throughout the Bible and the Christian religion about women being, when it's okay to rape a woman, when it's okay. There's some really vile stuff about women in the Bible, and I don't think one can just take that as its own without considering the structure of the religion itself. You can't just say, well, it's people misreading the Bible. The words are there on the page to misinterpret, including, describing the type of rod that you should beat your wife with.
There's no doubt about it in the Bible, especially the Old Testament. There's some really cutthroat, nasty stuff there. There's slavery, but we've had slavery in the United States too, and I think that
which was justified by the Bible too.
Some people try to justify.
Let's back up for a second and just say that the Bible maybe God's mistake. Can I say that? Is He made the Bible too wordy, and so there's so much stuff chalked in there that and let's go back a few years, because in the modern era. Although nobody actually has ever read the Bible in the modern era,
remember, for example, the laws in this country. I'm going to say the laws in this country are. You as a lawyer would agree with me probably that the laws are extremely complex, and they're intended to actually provide a set of rules that we're supposed to live by. But you go to the Bible, which is also supposed to be a set of rules we're supposed to live by, and they're far more confusing than the law, but they also contain lots of stuff that are just really nasty.
Wait, listen, just hear me, guys. Hear me out for a second, guys. What I was going to say about this, though, is that the Bible is very wordy. It's filled with all kinds of stuff. And go back a number of years before most people were literate, okay? When the average person was not literate. Because keep in mind that when the Bible was written, it wasn't like you could just go read the Bible, right? Most people couldn't read.
No, most people did not read the Bible.
Most people didn't read at all. So it's really a series of texts written for guys on the inside, and I say guys, to.
But I think the Bible too. It's a moral compass. It's not meant to be interpreted literally.
Well, let's stop for a minute. Who was the Bible written for? The Bible was not written. So let's go back. The Bible was not written for the masses. Okay, the Bible was written for the learned clergy and anybody scholarly, perhaps, who wanted to look at it. But basically, it was a series of notes and scholarly writings aimed at other would-be preachers and a religious clergy.
Well, that's mostly true, but the letters from Paul, for example, were specifically written to the church to be read to the church.
To be read to the church. Again, but now you're going to come to my point here in a second, though. But it's still from him to somebody else to, quote, be read to the church. Well, guess what? The guy who reads the text controls what's in the text. So even in Pennsylvania today, even as of right now, if you're charged with a crime, when you walk into court to be what they call arraigned, you have the option of having the judge read out loud the charges and all the paperwork to you, on the assumption that's an old rule, but it was based on the fact that you might not know what's in the paper, and the sheriff could tell you what's in the paper, the cops could tell you what's in the paper, everyone else. The idea was, since the judge is fair and neutral, he's actually going to read it to you and tell you what's actually in the papers. And the point is that you can paraphrase. So let's talk about the Bible. If you're a misogynist and you hate women, right? You can just go right to the Bible and justify every bad thing you want to do to a woman. If you're a progressive, you can simply stop preaching out of certain books. If you're horrified by women's breasts, you can just skip the Song of Solomon. My point being is it's the kind of tome that when you hold it up in the air over your followers, you can pick and choose which verses to read, knowing that even in the literary era that we live in, or I should say literate era that we live in, where 95% of the people could actually read the book in your hand, you can depend on the fact that only 15% actually have, and you're still going to be able to run the show by saying, here's a verse that says this. Whether, has anybody ever really sort of gone back and said, I wonder if my pastor is pulling this out of context or...
Yeah, well, and I think I've listened to a lot of radio preachers, and they've kind of, some of them are good. They give more of the full story and the context. You hear a lot of verses, like if you read the Lebanon Daily News, they have a Sunday Bible verse, and people will pick and choose different verses to, say people need to work and not get food stamps or get food stamps. But in the reality, you got to be a pretty smart person to read the Bible and understand the context and the history of everything that's going on in that time frame.
Right, but that does bring up a point that I commonly make, and that is that if you're right, that the Bible can be used like the scrying devices of old for the observer to divine whatever they want out of the material to present it to other people. And if God exists and is all-knowing and is all-powerful and is all-good and is all-present, then at some point you have to reason that God would know that this is how the Bible was going to be used. And if God was actually wanted the best for us, would then come up with a better way to communicate his message to mankind.
But I think God allows free will, and I think that's a whole other theory. So, he's going to let people make their own decisions based on the way
right.
They
think. But if I say, I'm a rationalist, I'm an evidentialist, and I'm concerned about evidence and I'm concerned about reason, and I'm interested in holding any claim that comports itself with the nature of reality. So therefore, I'm interested in what the nature of reality actually is, and God knows this, and knows that the Bible itself, because it's a document, just like any other document, there's the same amount of reason to believe in the Bible as there would be to believe in, say,
Narnia.
Harry Potter and believe that Voldemort exists.
Narnia.
But I think their counter argument, a religious pastor would say, the whole point of religion and the way it was designed by God is that it requires some faith where you're not always going to have evidence for everything you believe in.
Right.
Because
but if I reject faith out of religion,
well,
okay.
But if faith is the key, why does it have to be faith in a particular?
Faith's a big part of religion. So
but I'm saying
if you reject faith and take it out, then you're not really having the way God was designing religion to be.
But I'm trying to say, if faith is a test, why can't it be the faith in anything? So if faith is a test, is my faith in Buddha just as good as my faith in Christ?
That's right. You got to make that call.
Well,
but the consequences of making the wrong call in the Christian religion are so severe that you would think that a God that cares about us would allow for more than just faith to make that decision.
Now,
I guess the way I look at it logically is there's two pathways, right? You can either say that all this stuff is probably true, and if I don't believe in God and I don't follow the Bible, I'm going to go to hell. Or you could say that, there is no such thing as God, it's all myth and it's made up. So I have two options. I can go through my life and say, I don't believe in God, this is a joke, it's a fairy tale. And then when
those aren't the only two options.
Okay,
those are not the only two options.
Let me finish my example, though, okay?
Okay.
So in my mind, this is the way I see it. So I can go through my life, right? Logically, it would be better for me to follow God and live a life that's somewhat at least moral to the best of my ability, because if I'm right, that means I'm going to go to heaven, and if I'm wrong, well, then I'll just go into darkness anyway. But
But the Bible doesn't say that it's moral living.
Say I go through my life and I don't believe in God. I take the opposite path in my own mind. Then if I'm right, then I go into darkness like some atheists think. But if I'm wrong, I go to hell forever. So the logical decision making would be to just behave and get in line, right?
Well, okay, but if the decision so the Bible presents hell is an option for those who do not believe that Jesus is the Son of God, that the Holy Ghost exists, that God exists, as Christianity describes it. But there are many religions in the world that also make the same claims. So what you're saying in that position is you're saying, okay, well, the Christian God exists, but Zeus does not exist, nor does he care whether I believe in him or not, even though there might be just as dire consequences for not believing in that religion. The fact
it's 717-916-5189. 717-916-5189 to get here live. We're on the air broadcasting, so you can hear what's going on. And we'll see what happens here, hopefully. Guys, call back in because, good old Skype here has come back up. So we should. Okay, and we're back. Yeah. Nothing beats a little technical difficulty, right? Oh, lordy, lordy. Okay, you're back, my friend. I think Chris can get back on. I guess we had a little interruption in our internet connectivity there. I'm not sure exactly what that was all about, but
that was fun. But I don't remember where I don't know exactly where we cut out. But I was talking about Pascal's wager, which is what Chris was mentioning.
yes.
And I said something about I was talking about the numerous number of gods out there that you could possibly believe or not believe in, and the various consequences for belief and non-belief. So my first example why that wager was wrong is because it's not just one religion you're
Yes, I think we're actually having a little difficulty with Comcast right now. They seem to be losing their connectivity periodically. So that may be actually what's going on here. I don't know. You think you got it all solved. You think you got it all worked out. And then lo and behold, along comes the difficulties of the internet. The other thing we need to probably try to do is solve the connectivity problems by getting two separate internet connections. I think that's really going to be where I'm going to have to go with this eventually, but I think we'll make it work. So, Chris, you're back on the air, and
I'm back in the house.
Brian, you're back on the house. Again, 779-65.
landline backup.
You know what? At this point, I don't.
I
because
have a cell phone. I keep getting a British lady answering machine when I call.
Yeah, me too.
Let me tell you what's going on. So right now, I'm just broadcasting off some laptops and a wireless and all this other horse crap. And what I'm going to do, and if anybody, by the way, if anybody who's listening has a location that they want to use, I ideally looking for like one room somewhere where I could set up in and just put everything in and hardwire it into a slightly faster connection with a backup. But this usually works real well. But today, the weather, I don't know if the weather's a little garbagey out there. There's some thunderstorms going on because I think Comcast from time to time has some trouble. And that's our internet service provider here. And when the weather gets junky, they sometimes get hit by lightning or whatever happens, and then everything drops for a minute. But that's all it takes with a live broadcast like this. If you guys drop or Spreaker's dropped twice now, although I've learned not to panic because it comes back up pretty quick. The one thing that they've got figured out in the tech end here is that if you don't panic, it'll reconnect itself as soon as the internet quits farting around.
Well, all right. So I was the other prong of Pascal's wager, because I think I got through the first one clear enough. But the other prong is that it presumes that if I fake belief in God, or if I decide, okay, well, I'm going to believe in God because I have no other choice, that this all-knowing, all-powerful super being will somehow look past the fact that I don't really believe, and I'm just believing because I don't want to go to hell.
Well, maybe it's like marrying the farmer's daughter. You may not like her at first, but you'll jump into the marriage. All right, my friend, how are you? Can I hear you?
Hello?
Yeah, I've got you.
Okay. So I don't think that an all-knowing, all-powerful super being is quite the same thing as a farmer's daughter.
No. Not at all.
Hello?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I'm here.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right. Go ahead, my friend.
All right, I was saying that I don't think an all-knowing, all-powerful super being is quite the same thing as a farmer's daughter. I mean, you're positing a God that knows everybody's hearts and and somehow, well, just because you signed on the dotted line because you didn't want to go to hell, all of a sudden, here's the pearly gates, some have a good time. And then how does that compare to someone who just can't get past this idea and then decide and ends up going to hell because they aren't able to find the faith to believe?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think we lost him again. All right, I don't know what's going on with our Skype connection. Dear old Skype, dear old Skype. Let's play around with this for a minute. What we're going to do in the meantime here, I have for you a little ditty. I talked to my mother a little earlier, so let's hear what she has to say about these things. Hey, Mom, how are you?
Hi, how are you?
Good.
What a beautiful afternoon here in Western New York.
So what's going on up there? Anything we need to know about or no?
No, not really. I don't think so. It's just beautiful weather and everybody's enjoying it.
Who is going to be the next governor of New York State? Is there any consensus on that yet amongst the people?
Well, because the Democrats have 2-to-1 registration versus Republicans, it looks like probably Cuomo will get it.
So,
and remain as governor.
And I imagine that in your area of the state, there's still a little dissatisfaction with that, being the western end of the state.
More so, and there's more registered Republicans here, versus Democrats in the general area.
Well, we're gonna be talking tonight about a couple different topics on the show, so I want to hit you up with a few of them here. First of all, somebody told me the other day that dogs do not go to heaven, okay? And that's because they don't have souls. And therefore, if you're a good Christian, you know that your dog will not be greeting you at the